Thank you for joining us for the 10th anniversary edition of EXPO Chicago, the International Exposition of Contemporary and Modern Art. I'm Kate Sears-Butowski, Director of Programming, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to Dialogues, presented in partnership with the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Dialogues offers panel discussions, conversations, and provocative artistic discourse with leading artists, curators, designers, and arts professionals on the current issues that engage them. This year, EXPO Chicago is proud to present the return of the Directors Summit, a program that invites a diverse group of emerging museum leaders from across the United States for a 3-day program addressing the shifting dynamics of museum leadership today. Shaped in partnership with museum consultant Jill Snyder, a seasoned museum director, the Director Summit is centered on 2 public roundtable discussions on the dialogue stage. This is the first, and tomorrow at 2 p.m. we will have our follow-up roundtable discussion. These discussions will explore how new institutional systems lead to enduring structural changes and promote inclusivity. In a lively conversation, the cohort of leaders will share their lived experiences, experiments, and new pathways forward. A very, very special thank you to our partners at Sotheby's, Risk Strategies, and the University Club of Chicago for making this entire program possible. Please welcome Jill to the stage to introduce the 4 panelists involved in our first conversation.
Well, great to see everyone and so many colleagues here. Thank you for coming. It's a great honor to grow this program, thriving now in its 2nd year. And so it makes me question, how do you measure the success of the Directors Summit? And for one, it forges a meaningful bond among a leadership cohort. If we have learned one thing during these past few years, it's that we need one another. And second, by design, the roundtables bring into the public realm conversations that require a refreshing measure of candor and vulnerability, which centers us in our shared humanity. And finally, the Directors Summit illustrates the emotional weight of institutional change that falls heavily, I would say, at the feet of directors. By placing focus on an emerging generation of museum leaders, the Directors Summit looks forward with hope. These leaders are rising in a moment of urgency, yet they are playing the long game necessary for change. We will hear today, and again tomorrow, about their inspiring, creative, and entrepreneurial initiatives to upend institutional inequities. Given our time constraint to 1 short hour, I have asked each director to share an initiative that reflects structural and systemic change. Following these brief presentations, I will moderate a conversation among them and will preserve time at the end to take questions from the audience. So I'm now going to introduce our 4 wonderful panelists. Daisy Desrosiers, director at the Gund Gallery at Kenyon College. Courtney Martin from the Yale Center for British Art. Veronica Roberts from the Cantor Art Center at Stanford University. And Klaudio Rodriguez, the Bronx Museum. Okay, let's jump into it. We're going to start with Daisy.
Yes. So I just start this dance. This is the clicker for the images. Is that right? Okay. Well, hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here. What I'm introducing today is not a case study that we have explored, but something that we're implementing, we're reflecting upon, and so very much an idea and a work in progress. Let me see. For those of you, and I know we have a few Kenyon alums, so for those of you who have not visited us on campus, this is the museum. This is the Gund Gallery that is located on Kenyon ground in Gambier, Ohio. The project that we're in coming into this role in 2021 in looking at were some of the opportunities that we could explore together as a community. But looking at this institution that was founded in 2011, so a young institution where there's already so much that needs to be furthered and fostered, what could be an opportunity for an academic museum in a rural area? What could we explore together as students were coming back to campus and as we're still developing who is our community beyond the walls of our campus? And so came this incredible invitation from the Mellon Foundation to reflect with them as part of their Museum's Future initiative, which aimed to support new leadership at the helm of cultural institution and how we were thinking about, how we were reflecting on the pandemic, what were some of the measures or new program that we wanted to implement, but also the rise of Black Lives Matter. How, as a cultural institution, were we reflecting on these two poles? And so I had just moved and was really very much discovering the area. So Kenyon College is in Knox County. The town next to the campus is Mount Vernon, which is 5 miles away, a short 8 minutes if you take the right ride, as you can see on the map. There's also a bike ride, and there's a shuttle from the campus to the town next. And so what we decided to explore was this idea, how do I go back? Of an outpost. So in Mount Vernon, you have this beautiful kind of historical corner, and this storefront was empty. And so we just started imagining what would it mean to think about community, about audience building, relationship building as an outcome of this moment. And what is the space where we can do that? Understanding that being located on an academic campus required that people know where to find us on the campus, and that the architecture of a museum should and could be something that we could reflect upon together. On the other end, a storefront and the way the storefront was already designed could be an opportunity to build greater relationship with our local community. Using this design where people can walk by, look inside, they already know what to do. You can pop in, come back. There was something a little bit more informal about this architecture that felt like a great opportunity to share what we do best and to also challenge how we do it. And have this space where it's much more about mutual relationship. And for us as a team and as an institution to really think about the role of an academic museum for the life of its community beyond the campus. And so the annex is set to open this summer. It is still being renovated as we speak. But the program that we're hoping to carry in that space is actually directly informed by specific work in our collection. So we are looking at works by underrepresented artists or practices that we want to center in the light of current issues. So thinking about Louise Nevelson, who was born in Ukraine, thinking about some of the questions that we can tease out of this reality, and starting with the work, starting with the practice. And so it's very much an outpost where 4 partnerships have been built with local organizations. Station Break, for example, which is a retired community center in Knox County, where we're already doing weekly program, having the opportunity to invite them in, share works from the collection. I'm looking at this incredible work by Faith Ringgold, Dancing at the Louvre, which is a work in our collection. We are in conversation with a group of local quilters and what it means to think about quilting from a Midwestern tradition in relationship to the history that's embedded in Faith Ringgold's work. So I will leave it there, but it's just an invitation to thinking about this problem of how do we return to our spaces, how do we challenge how we use our spaces, and in this case, having this space that could have, that could provide a new wind to the kind of conversation and the kind of neighbor that we can be as a museum and an institution. So, off to you.
Hi, I'm Courtney Martin, and I'm the director of the Yale Center for British Art in New Haven, Connecticut. For those of you who are familiar with New Haven, there are 2 museums, the Yale Center for British Art and the Yale University Art Gallery. We're the British one, as I like to tell people. When I arrived at the museum, I arrived, I think, with 2 very concrete periods that I had just come out of in my own professional career. One was that for many years I had been a professor, and the other is that I had been a curator. And in both, I had very similar questions posed to me, often around the idea that there just simply weren't enough people of color to hire, or that positions were being unfilled because there was no, sort of one to take that place, or no one to sort of advance forward in an institution. Simultaneously, I saw something that I thought was happening on the academic side, which was that so many people of color who were coming into an interest in museums, an interest in curating, and even an interest in teaching art inside the academy did so outside the boundaries of art history. But they did so also with a lean towards the contemporary. I can tell you, having tried to teach a group of undergraduates at almost every school that I ever taught at, it's incredibly hard when you want to enter into a conversation about the present when you can't go very far into the past. It leaves a lot of holes and it requires a lot of work. My own training in 18th and 19th century art history allowed me to do that, but I did not feel like we were training enough people who would be able to do this in the future. On the other side of this, I didn't have a way to fill this void for me. So I began talking with my colleague Stephen Nelson at CASVA, which is now called the Center, which is the Academic and Research Institute of the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. We're a sort of natural partner with the National Gallery because, in fact, we were both sort of founded by the Mellons. Andrew Mellon, of course, founded the National Gallery in DC, and Paul Mellon and his sister Ailsa then finished it for their father after his death. And so there was a sense in which we were sort of almost siblings, in a sense, about how we would work together. And one of the things that we understood for both of our institutions is that we knew about postdoctorates, we knew about postgraduate work, we know how to train people for both sides of this field. But what we did not necessarily know how to do was to sort of fix what we saw as a lack in what was happening educationally. What we then decided to work on was a shared postdoc. The postdoc allows for anyone who has received a doctorate but has not either gained tenure in the academy nor have they ascended sort of in the ranks of a curatorial job. So you can come from either side. And hopefully you will have come from a very contemporary field in which you realize that this is the moment in which learning something else, expanding on what you've already done, would be the way forward. That you should shift what you are interested in is not the goal, that you should expand, in fact, is really the case here. And so we have started a 2-year fellowship, which will allow people to enter 1 year with us, 1 year in DC. In the year that is spent with the Yale Center for British Art, one will work on an exhibition. The first fellow that enters with us will work on the Turner exhibition, which will launch in 2025 for what would have been Turner's 250th birthday. It's going to be an incredible celebration. I wish you were there for us. The other year, the person will spend working at the National Gallery on the 18th and 19th century history. And out of those 2 years, they will have attained both working on an exhibition that was at a historical period at a remove from their own training, but they will also then receive access into catalog production, access into working with mentors, the ability to take courses at Yale, and then ultimately, we hope, the effort to return to the field of their choice, either museums or the academy, with the ability to either teach or curate or write or whatever in an expanded way. So that's our goal. And our first person is set to arrive July 1st.
I'm Veronica Roberts, and I am a very new director at a very old museum. So I started 9 months ago as director of the Cantor Art Center, which is at Stanford University, and the museum was founded in 1891. So it's been there for a long time. But I wanted to share a project that is near, one of the reasons that I took the job was the Asian American Art Initiative. And I first learned about this when I was a curator of modern and contemporary art at the Blanton at another university art museum, the University of Texas at Austin. And I think the press release came out in 2020, and I read about it and thought it was an amazing endeavor and circulated the press release among my colleagues and also among the leadership, and tracked down the emails of a curator who I'm now the boss of, Elisa Alexander, and I tracked down the email for Marcy Kwan, who is the faculty member in art history. And together they co-founded this initiative, and it was announced in 2020, but we just launched it. And they created an initiative that was really dedicated to fostering the study of artists of Asian American descent, so also the Asian diaspora. And what I was really struck by when I read about this was I was really impressed that it was long-term. It's an ongoing initiative forever. It was a commitment that the university really puts, the stake in the ground. And so I was very excited about that. I also knew that it really reflected the community and the population, and a community that's been really overlooked, but really felt authentically serving the Bay Area, serving California. And I also felt like it was something that a university museum could uniquely do, and isn't that smart to be figuring out those spaces where you really can make a difference. So it's really dedicated to preserving archival materials, collecting and exhibiting works by artists, and fostering an undergraduate and graduate study, and cultivating community collaboration. And so I wrote a piece of fan mail, basically, to these now colleagues of mine, and never imagined that I would end up getting to work so closely with them. But it's been such an interesting project, and one with some challenges. Mostly it's been deeply rewarding. Some of the easier things, I think that the space of, museums are well equipped to collect, right? This is a space we're really comfortable in. So that has been robust and exciting and thrilling, and one of the first acquisitions that was made before my time, but I made sure that I arrived as director the day that it opened, which was the Faces of Ruth Asawa, which you're seeing on the screen here. A wonderful, sort of less appreciated part of her facet, and such an extraordinary artist. And this was preserved and brought to the museum, and it's on basically long-term infinite view. But those are the spaces that we are comfortable in, that we know, and also exhibitions. We just launched our first inaugural exhibitions devoted to Asian American art history. And those were really wonderful and rewarding. But what about the spaces, the collaborative spaces, and how do you have an equitable collaboration when you're working with faculty who do not have development departments, for example, or if they do, it's a small, it's them. They are the department. And how do you also work? It's been really thrilling to work with the library, Stanford Collections. They have been an incredible partner. But they also just lost a building, and everything's backlogged in archives. And so if we'd like to bring any archives in, we need to fundraise, and they don't really do fundraising either. So it's just trying to think about these ways that how do we sustain the mission and of course we need to resource everything we're doing, but how do we also work collaboratively in these spaces? And it's been really illuminating for me since in the first 9 months. So there were some really exciting projects, but you could start to see some of these challenges take root. And one of them, let me just give you an example. That's the amazing co-directors. That's Elisa Alexander in the middle, and on the far right, Marcy Kwan, the art history faculty member who co-founded this. And I should say that when they co-founded this, one of the things I was impressed by is that it was not an initiative of a director, and it was not an initiative of a dean or a provost. It was what we call a junior faculty member, someone who does not have tenure, and an assistant curator at the museum. So I was very impressed that this was a sort of, internally organized and not something that was kind of coming down on high. This was the convening that Marcy and Elisa and many others put together this fall. I think of it as sort of an Asian American loophole of retreat. It was just an unbelievable gathering of scholars, intergenerational scholars, artists, poets, writers, curators. It was an incredible 2-day extravaganza. I see many people in the room who were there. But one of the challenges is okay, so if you're going to bring people from, in some cases, Asia and Europe, how do we make this all happen? And we are generally using up the majority of the resources at the Cantor as the hub, but we also, we did all the grant writing for this, and thinking about the way that academia, in particular, the hierarchies of what is considered valuable work is something I hadn't really been thinking about as a curator and now think about. So, for example, it's does organizing a symposium, of course it's valued by the university. This was a marquee event. There were a lot of people in attendance, but in terms of the labor that was involved, it is not going to advance your case necessarily towards tenure. And really the museum needed to, get the grants, for example, try to apply for grants and things like that. And I've just been really sensitive to not just the division of the allocation of resources, but of time and labor, and what can we expect of faculty, especially junior faculty, in terms of the work that they're putting in. So those are just some of the questions that we're grappling with. And I also think that this is going to be collaborative in ways that I can't even imagine right now. I think there's so many conversations. This is only going to, because this is forever and ongoing, it's so important to understand these inequities and also how to build really trusting collaborations, because we hope to do many more of them. We already have so much interest, and there's already so much great work being done in the Bay Area and up and down the coast. And we're all looking to collaborate. This is not a space that we occupy by ourselves. So trying to figure out how to do this in an equitable way. And let's be honest, collaboration is more work. Doing it on your own by yourself is actually easier, or faster maybe. I don't know, easier. But so just really being honest about the ways that we allocate our time and our resources, and building these great collaborations in a thoughtful way is something that is really going to be integral to the Cantor's success and the success of the initiative, and is something I'm really excited to dig in with all of you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Klaudio Rodriguez. I am the director at the Bronx Museum, and what you see here is our new design for our new wing at the building. And this is what we've been tackling and dealing with as I entered. I became director right in the middle of the pandemic, so we inherited a difficult time to go into a capital project. But actually, what it allowed us to do is to take some time and step back and really think about what this project meant for us as an institution. So originally, when we started to, this is something that predates me when the project began. And originally, it was just the thought of moving the entry point of the museum to a more visible location, to create more visibility for the campus, to create a more seamless flow throughout the museum. But we started to think about what that really meant for the community. As a community museum, we're a community-centered museum. We are the mission of the museum is grounded on the community and the work that we do in the community. So clearly there was several things that we needed to do. We needed to be visible, we needed to be accessible, we needed to be welcoming, we needed to create spaces that allowed for the community to engage with us, to congregate, to feel like they belong in the space. We are also a free museum, one of the only free museums in all of New York City as well. And how do we also remove those barriers, those perceived barriers that the museums have when you walk in the door, that transition from the inside, from the outside into the inside, through a ticketing system, through this other way of engaging. So we wanted to make sure that once you entered the space, you were immersed. We call it a project space, immersed in art. And we minimized the front desk at all as an information desk, is what we're actually calling it at this point. But in speaking to the architects and going through the process, we started to realize as a staff programmatically that it was more than just about a space. It was more about oops, sorry, I went back. This is our sort of a representation of our new space here. It was more than just a space. It was how do we address and engage with our audiences. So we started to think about organizational, institutionally, how the staff is put together, how we're organized, what kind of programs we put together, how we address all our different communities. So we've done historically a very good job of working with youth. We have great youth programs. Our educational programs are wonderful. But then I realized as we spoke that we're talking about ramping and flow through galleries and equitable access and how do you move through the spaces. And then we started to talk about labels and how do you present labels, and how do you present information, and then wayfinding, and how do you provide this wayfinding? How do you make it accessible to everyone? We have about 90% of the population in the Bronx is not originally from the United States. They've come from a variety of West Africa, Caribbean, et cetera, through different methods of communicating movement through the space. But then we started to think about also lighting. How do you light things? How do you create spaces where wheelchairs can move through? So you started thinking about all these other spatial considerations and then engagement considerations. And then we decided, we also need to consider our older adult population, which is a largely underserved group in the Bronx. We have, I believe right now it's about 32% 50 and over in the Bronx. And I guess I'm in that group now, unfortunately. But of that percentage, 90% are of color, and about 40 to 50% are below the poverty line. So clearly they don't have resources. And we are one of the few free resources that they can engage. So I got together with my staff and I said, look, we need to really think about how we engage them further. So this is just the entry to what we're doing. And once they're here, what is it that we're going to do? So we've reworked in the departments a little bit. Our education department now is the Department of Education and Public Engagement. We've brought in we brought in other staff to support that. And we've applied for several grants. Unfortunately, we've gotten them to support senior programming. And one of the challenges at first is, frankly, staff pushback, is capacity. How do we do this extra layer of work? Because it's a lot more work than we have outside of education. One of the first things we were able to do is we hired 3 full-time educators to come in and work with our seniors. The other challenge was training. How do you train them? Where do we get the training from? So through one of these grants that we received, we're getting training. The staff is getting training to work with it. So what we're providing now is a series of 8 sequential programs that will happen throughout the whole entire year, working with seniors. And the hope is not only that they're working within these programs, but that they're engaging with the entire museum community and the work that we're doing. So we have intergenerational programs, working with our teen programs, working with our youth programs. We are hoping to have artists back online once the capital project, so we have working artists in the space. And so we want to create this sort of seamless approach from beginning to end and engage the community, and really engage the community in the way that we're looking to engage, rather than just sort of pick and choose. We want to be really holistic about the way that we approach it. So this capital project is what it's done is it's opened the door to really reimagine how we're staffed, how we're programmed, how we engage. I mean, even down to the website. We reworked the whole entire website, to have bigger lettering, bilingual translations, et cetera. So it's a whole entire approach. It changed the whole entire way that we were looking at our communities and how we were engaging with them. Thank you.
Thank you, all 4 of you. And, once again, as reminded me from last year, change takes so many different pathways. And your 4 different initiatives couldn't be more different, but each so specific to your own organizations. I'm wondering if, Klaudio and Veronica, you talked a bit about the challenges and some of the learnings along the way. And I wanted to invite Daisy and Courtney to talk a bit about what surprises you encountered. Did you find resistance? Was there pushback? If we're confronting systems that are entrenched and are familiar and historic, what happens when you try to change those in your respective university and college environment?
Well, I feel because it's about to unfold, it's pretty much an ongoing learning curve. In thinking about this space, and I should say, when I moved to Ohio, I started in June of 2021. So it's this moment where people had been longing for each other, but we kind of didn't know how to meet one another. And I took an apartment that's right above the annex. So I would see this space. I had an opportunity. I didn't know it would be a space that we would consider, but what I'm trying to say is I was slowly getting to know this environment and kind of getting to know the community around it as well. And I remember approaching this thought of what it would be to take an outpost, what it would be to consider this extra space. And a little bit like what Klaudio mentioned, You get pushback as to how we're going to do this, even when you're at just the beginning of dreaming about it and thinking about encounter, just building a relationship, finding space where it could be safe to explore, to ask a question, and to kind of decenter where some of this knowledge exists in a museum and proposing that out of this natural space. There was a lot of pushback, lots of question about how would this work out. But I would say having the support of Mellon to explore this idea gave an opportunity for engagement internally that was kind of solidified by the support of a grant organization by Mellon. After that, the goal was really to build partnership that would be at the center of how we would achieve activating this space, how we would engage the collections, so it wouldn't only be our curatorial team, our faculty member, that there was actually community member that could feel empowered, that we could learn together to do this work. And it started with conversation. And people would say, Daisy, it's not gonna work. We've never been able to be in conversation with this community. And I just asked, like, how did it started? What was the offer? What was the conversation? And I realized that there was a lot that had to do with maybe projection, but starting a conversation to really identify where you share space. And I'm saying this because we are a liberal art college in rural Ohio, and so the divide between what could be seen as town and gown is something that we refer to. But actually, how do we tackle that? How do we actually gauge is there a tension? What is the tension? And what are the interstices where there are surprises, where we actually could meet in the middle and get to know each other better? And I think in this regard, our hypothesis is that art could be a point of departure for that through making, to exploring where we share an understanding of quilting, what it means to look at this practice from the vantage point of someone who has been quilting based on the tradition of Ohio, as opposed to the southern part of the US, right? And creating a kind of weave narrative between differences as opposed to started by what divides us as a point of departure.
I love that.
That's the reflection.
So, question, just a follow-up question. Has there been an aha moment where you feel like you've turned the corner, whether there's someone who was important to influence, or where you felt, okay, I'm making some headway here?
I think I was surprised that everyone would say yes. Like at some point when you start having these conversations, and you come in and you're kind of trying to gauge how there was excitement, there was curiosity, and I think at this moment in time and still today, it's longing for what connects us. It's tapping into our shared humanity, like we're all curious. There's opportunity to always be surprised by someone else. I have to say, this idea and this project received tremendous support from the then president of Kenyon, Sean Decatur, who had been thinking and working within the community in a way that was also new, or kind of an ongoing new goal for Kenyon. So coming in and having this opportunity to kind of deliver and propose a case study was actually really exciting as a mode of exploration, like where you position experimentation at the center and failure in a very positive way. Like, how do we learn from trying something different together? How do we share? We have this incredible collection that's going on loan in so many different locations. Maybe there is a curiosity for what is happening inside our academic museum. And because we're a young institution, I got excited, and I think the team got excited, or we got excited together to really challenge that. What can an academic museum be today? What is this learning and teaching that can happen in an interdisciplinary way, but also between generation, to Claudio's earlier point? So, yeah, more to come, I'm sure. More haha. I don't know. How about you?
You know, it's interesting. I felt that the problem was so clear, and I felt that my partner, Stephen Nelson at CASVA, that it was so clear to him as well, because we had been academics, and and I think Stephen, in some ways is still very much feeling that hold on his side of the profession. And yet, I think that when we approached even people who are our former students to say, yes, you have the PhD now. Yes, you have this first great job, or you have this, this first great sort of entree into your, particular area in the field, and to say, but there might be a ceiling, and that ceiling it might happen really, really soon. What's your next step? And to sort of have to say that to someone in a way that was both realistic, but I think that once you take on the work of, working with younger people, be it as an academic or be it as in a curatorial manner, you have to become a mentor for the long haul. It doesn't end when they get the first job. It may need, I look at the people who worked with me 25 years ago, and they are still involved in a conversation with me now. It changed and it shifts over time. We have to stay into that as well. And so I think that what we're asking for is a longevity, which I don't know that at the outset of talking about this proposal, which is what it very much was, with either of our staffs, we're saying this is going to be a long time before we make sure that we have given, the fellows who will come into this program enough to move forward. We are having to commit to be with them through mid-career. That might be another decade, right? The other side of it, though, is then to say to the person for whom we're asking them to commit to this that you're going to see this ceiling. It's going to happen. Instead of being frustrated by it, arm yourself for it. Get ready for it. And, someone said to me, Courtney, don't present this as a problem that they have to solve. Present this fellowship to them as a prize that they could win. And I just, I was so struck by that. It wouldn't have dawned on me. I mean, it's been a while since I got a PhD, but I have to say the idea of turning around and going back to retrain sounds like a lot. And so I can imagine how daunting that might seem, except that if somebody had said, this retraining will help you keep moving forward. It's not to stop you in place. It's to actually keep you pushing forward. I also think that one of the things that we didn't foresee, Jill, I think one of the things that we didn't foresee is we didn't foresee the sort of bureaucracy. So the National Gallery and Yale University coming together for a concept that needed to turn around within basically a year. Yeah. And so that we stayed on track and we got everybody along and talking to the lawyers on both sides to explain why we needed to explicitly say that we wanted people of color, why we needed to explicitly say that we wanted people who were coming from, underserved backgrounds, people who might, have a PhD, but were first generation, college students initially, that retained aspects for them in their careers that we needed to move forward with. Those weren't always conversations that we could have and then be done. We had to keep coming back and saying, okay, this is what it is. I also think that we have asked, speaking of your statement about labor, we've asked our own staff to remain involved in something that we don't know what's going to happen. But I have to say that the thing that I want most out of this is a Band-Aid. It might not even be a Band-Aid in terms of the field. What I really want more than anything else is I want every other institution that has this kind of capacity to find a partner and do it as well. So I look at the Huntington, who has both a museum and a research institute and a library. I look at the GRI and the Getty Museum, who have both. They could easily do this. I look at every university museum in this country, Veronica, who could also be doing this. I look at every museum in every major city that has a university that is sitting, somewhere near them, Columbia to the Met. You could easily do this. So it's, I don't want to be alone, and I don't want to be a star in this. I want to be in a collaborative group.
Now I know why I'm on the panel. This is all matchmaking. But I wanted to ask you, Klaudio, I was curious about the senior. I think it's so interesting that you were thinking about accessibility for seniors and that that's such an important part of your community. And you mentioned that it changed the way that, for example, the website looks and feels. How has it changed? And you talked about programming a lot. I was curious if it's also affecting in any way the wayfinding or the physical experience in space, or if it's made you look at the new building differently and the design of it, or if it was, I'm just curious how it's infiltrating in ways beyond the website and programming that's specifically catering.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, when I was fortunate enough that when I got to the museum, we were still actually in RFP phase, so we were still looking to work with architects. So I was very precise in who I wanted to work with and the type of work that they did. And understanding the context of the community and the work that we were doing. So actually the architects are moral architects. They've done a lot of work in the Bronx. So they're very familiar with working in the type of communities that we serve. If you're familiar with the building, one of the biggest issues, I think that the biggest, right when you walked in, you understood is that, we talk about equity and access, and the building is anything but. Yeah. Anything but. It is the most unfriendly place to navigate. It has all these multiple levels. It is 2 different buildings that were sort of slammed together. One was a converted synagogue at one point. So you had all these different levels, stairs, rises, ups and downs. There's not a real sort of circuit to the place. It doesn't make a lot of sense how you navigate the space. You enter from another building, you come out on the other side. So that actually was the beginning sort of driver on it. Because also when we had the original RFP, and this is a city museum, so we have to go through all these different processes working with the city and scope of work and what is funded and what's not funded. And I was fortunate enough to work with a group that was really flexible, that I kept sort of, they kept calling it creep. I kept creeping into different areas of the museum. I said, well, if we're gonna address this, but then this part doesn't make sense, so we really need to address that. And if we don't address this, then we need to address that. And what those points were like, okay, so if we enter this gallery now at this level, but then you have another gallery and it's not accessed anymore. You don't have the right access for someone that has mobility issues, right? So then we need to address that. So then we need to ramp it somehow. But then the lighting doesn't quite work. So then we need to work on the lighting. So I kept creeping into different areas of the building. But again, I was fortunate enough that I had a real tactile say in everything that was happening. I was there from the ground up. So we were really looking at how you navigate. And also, I'm a curator, so I also looked at it curatorially and how do you present something in a really accessible, open way and an understandable way, because right now the space is just not easy to navigate. So we looked at all those things. And then, of course, even into the infrastructure, as we were talking about technology, embedding technology into the space, how you control the lights, how you do this. But even I'm working with a company to do assisted listening devices at some point, so you can actually use other means of communicating with your public as well. So we're trying to embed the infrastructure in it before the building gets built. So yes, absolutely, we're thinking about all these different layers of, and the reason for the program is because I think that the programming, as I sat at the staff level, we started to formulate what that looked like, and then how did that inform what we wanted the space to, we wanted the space to function in itself. So yes, we thought about all these things. Yeah, thank you.
You can see why they're directors. They know how to pivot. Forgive me for excusing myself for a minute. Before we take questions from the audience, you're all collecting institutions. So I wanted to know if you could reflect a bit about how your initiatives are reshaping how you think about your collections and about the relationship to objects.
I can jump in on that one because collection building is something I love dearly and I'm not willing to give up as a director. But I think like many people in this room who also work at museums, by the time I arrived, if you're at a museum from 1891, the storage is at capacity the moment you find out that you're full. So I think having such a clear purpose of an Asian American art initiative, it's not the only, we're not only collecting Asian American art, but it gives us such a sense of purpose. And what has been really interesting to me is how many artists, their work, in a couple of cases, we had some archives that we don't personally collect, it's the special collections, that were going to be lost or destroyed if we didn't take them. I'm thinking of a particular photo studio from Chinatown, a really significant archive that literally, the heirs had no way of holding on to it, and if Stanford didn't take it, it was gonna just be destroyed. So, and a number of works that were conserved that were also in very vulnerable, precarious states that weren't worth a lot of money and that we conserved. So it's been giving us, I think, a sense of purpose that I really appreciate. But the other thing that I've really been thinking about in terms of collections and collection building is I thought that when I arrived, I really felt like the collection growth was reflecting community, and what I failed to appreciate was the fact that it was actually building community and not just reflecting it. And I heard, especially older artists who had been at this for quite some time and had saying that they felt seen for the first time, but also in one of the exhibitions that was curated, that show curated by a colleague of mine, two artists who had both been incarcerated in Topaz, Utah, and lived in the Bay Area their entire subsequent lives, met, even though they had been children in the same camp, met at the opening for the show and met each other for the first time. And so just moments like that and forging these connections between artists who didn't already know each other and are seeing their work in the same space, that was very powerful and shapes the way we're thinking about it in the future.
I think that one of the things that's important for me, I worked at the Yale Center for British Art when I was a student. And though I knew that I was a modernist, I worked on a show of the 18th and 19th centuries. And I think that when I returned to be the director of the institution, I think a lot of people were concerned and interested how someone, might treat a collection that is nominally outside of what they do day to day. And I think, in fact, one of the things that this project has given me is an insight into the idea that if you bring someone in and if you show them the collection, that they take on care and responsibility for it, no matter what their role is. And I think that happens, we see it in all kinds of ways. And so what I'm hoping for is that this is the start for giving someone the seed to understanding our collection, but also understanding the role of the curator relative to collections. I think that, it is not a secret probably to most people in this room, but, what you do in an institution as a curator is rarely ever wholly about the exhibitions that are on view to the public. Your care, your understanding of the collection, your worry, your fear of storage, all of those things are really, that's the job. And so I'm hoping that it keeps to sort of reinforce and instill that, because it's incredibly important. I am embarking on this show with Turner in 2025, largely because I knew 15 years ago that we had never had a major Turner exhibition from our institution, and we hold the largest collection of Turners in this side of the world. And so I wouldn't have known that otherwise. And so now I'm hoping that the person who comes into this position and the people after, this person will understand something else that I don't know about our collection.
Well, I go back to Veronica, this idea that a collection can build community, and I think that's where I'm positioning our institution, because it is a young institution. The museum is centered as part of the Kenyon experience. We have an incredible curator of academic program, and I think what we're trying to push forward as we add work to this collection, this young but mighty collection, is the deep care that can go into sharing it, and how the role, to your point, Courtney, the role of a curator is also ensuring that this stewardship, that this deep care for the stories that you're being entrusted with is something that you model, and that you create a pathway for different points of entry to think about the stories that it holds, but also how you bring people in. How do you meet them in the middle or where they are as an opportunity to kind of pursue these conversations? And so I'm inspired by that and excited to see how it unfolds. But certainly as we embark on this next chapter with a new acquisition budget for the collection, how do we keep thinking about that? How one object can build community, and how do you keep kind of revisiting and adapting that idea as the questions that we want to ask or the challenge that we face will keep also challenging us in return?
Thank you. I think when we look at our collection is a relatively small collection. I'd say 3,000 objects or so. Several things. We've really looked. We've been very good at, as you said, building and reflecting community in the work that we collect. We're a contemporary art museum. We largely collect BIPOC, LGBTQ artists, underrepresented artists. So the collection is really built on the backbone of the work that the museum does as well. I think we've become a little more discerning about the work that we're bringing in lately, just for care and space and et cetera. But I think one of the mandates, one of the that my curator's been working on, she's around here somewhere, is to really make the collection accessible out to the public. It's not. We don't have a permanent collection space, so we're hoping to dedicate a little area in the new building to the permanent collection. The permanent collection is largely unseen, unfortunately. So we're looking to expose more of the collection, and we actually for the first time ever, hired an archivist who's actually archiving the whole all the records for the collection, and we're hoping to make those available on our new website as well, to make them public for scholars, for study, for the community, et cetera. So it's an approach, again, to just have access to the collection that right now the community just does not have. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, I think we want to turn it over to the audience for any questions that you might have. And please wait for the mic to come.
Hi. Thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I was going to ask a question. I know that in some museum setting, it's a pretty thorny issue about selling pieces to acquire other artwork from BIPOC communities and so forth. And I know, for instance, the Baltimore Art Museum came into a lot of hot water about doing that. So to what degree do museums feel like that is necessary in order to add to their collection?
I followed that with great interest as well. And will say that I am very excited to embark on some deaccessioning. If you've been at a museum that's been around since 1891, there are some things that you will never show and that are in your care that are not, I think that are preventing you not just from buying work of BIPOC artists, but even just buying work or adding to the collection in any way. And but I think you're asking, is it necessary to do that? That's an interesting question, and I think we all answer that differently. And I think it has to do with, do you have, the museum that I came from before, the Cantor had, I think I was told there were $10,000 that could be spent on art. And if you know anything about, if you walked around the fair, I can spend that one day and that was it, and that was done. So it was very frustrating to not have endowed funds. But I think there are a lot of other ways you can go about also building reservoirs of funding and of money. And I will say that, for example, we also have endowments. So the opposite case, when I arrived at the Cantor, it's not that it was flush with money for acquisitions, but because it's been around since 1891, there were actual pots of money, but sometimes they're so odd. It's like, okay, there's a pot of money for left-handed artists who made drawings in the 18th century, and that's like flush, So if I want to get drawings from the 18th century, and it's like, well, how do I make that actually work for us? Because that's just really not where we're growing. So in this case, I'm actually meeting with we've been meeting with my colleagues in development. We're meeting with the general counsel and the attorneys to figure out, in some cases, like that may have made a lot of sense when we were an 18th century drawing institution, but that doesn't suit us now. So we're trying to change basically we'll have to go to court to change and to free up some of those funds. But I think the answer really is every institution's very different, and you'd be surprised by how many of my colleagues, we have very little money for acquisitions. And the problem is, when you want to acquire something as a curator, and you recognize it when it's affordable, by the time you actually fundraise and get the money, the work is out of range and you've missed the boat. So it really does matter to have those pockets. It's helpful if they're not overly prescriptive.
I don't know if you had seen the Center for Contemporary Art in Santa Fe had recently closed, and one of the employees had said that it was due to turning browner and younger. And I wondered if you feel that progress being made can survive the social and political divides that we're experiencing now, especially with legislation. You know, I live in a red state, so I'm very concerned. And I wondered if you could talk more about any initiatives you all might have and thoughts on this.
I have one really quick thought, and then I'll stop talking. But having worked in Texas, as I was leaving, I remember my colleagues feeling afraid to talk about artists of color in the sort of tour guides that we had, the faculty, teachers that would come in from high school. This fear that you're talking about is real. They were afraid to talk about artworks that had any content that could be perceived as engaging in critical race theory and being videotaped and fired from their jobs. So I think all I can say is I feel like the what you're describing and the fears around censoring when we see that books are being pulled from libraries, it feels very real. And I left that state, so I'm no longer dealing with it on the front lines, but I think I hear you, and I think it is very real.
I think I totally agree. I think also there's in 2020, I asked myself, why did it feel as if museums were, sort of center stage for all of the things that were happening in this country? And why go to the museum? And then I realized that I was asking the wrong question, or I was asking it from the wrong direction. Why not go to museums? Why did people go to MoMA, at the outset of America's entry into the Vietnam War? Because it was a stage, and it galvanized, that we can still talk about that moment in such clear ways. The repainting of the Guernica, and that feeling like this really horrible act also brought so much attention, I think, to the fact that the Guernica was an important work for Picasso, but that also it had real relevance to what was happening at that moment. And so I think instead of seeing sometimes this as the horror that's come to us, I think we've got to ask ourselves, how can we actually be the place that welcomes this and provides, the stage for the dialogue, the place where people meet. Daisy's, I think, sense of, going out to the community and not saying, oh, well, we just never got along. No, why don't you get along, and why couldn't we come to this one place and actually do it? I actually love the fact that people come to museums to spark debate. It is hard. And when it is happening inside of your museum and you're standing there watching people yell at your docents, it's incredibly difficult. And yet, if they weren't having it there, no one would be interested in what we did. Somebody who is having one of those discussions one day will go upstairs and look at my shows. And that might be worth it. Yeah.
I keep asking myself that question. When I took this position, I wondered, why would I move to rural Ohio in 2021? And I kept pondering on the question, and every time I would circle back to it or see what I still see, which is the potential of that place and the role that a museum can play in 2021, there's always something that sparked. It's not easy. Even going to the community also meant that I put myself on the front line and started having these conversations. I didn't ask anyone to come with me. I tested it for myself based on how I was feeling, what I was seeing, which was incredible grace and warmth in a rural environment. And so it even challenged some of my preconception. I'm not saying it's always going to be easy. I have to say, when I talked about that space, someone told me, well, be careful. Someone may break the window. And then I thought, well, if that happens, let's make sure we build a community that's going to come and join me in putting a new window in, that there will always be. And so I'm saying this because it's something that we tread very carefully. It's not a conversation, I don't go in talking about, presenting Fate Ringgold is not firsthand a conversation that I spark around racism. It's about it's about the history behind the work, and then where are some points of tension that we can tease out? Who's the audience with who we're having this conversation? As I said, it's a work in progress. The space is not open yet, so maybe in 1 year, I'll come back and say, well, let's think about it differently. But to Courtney's point, I just kept being interested in what could be tested and what could we try, and what does it mean to come together, and challenging that concept as one aspect of the work of a museum, to be continued. But in all these conversations, people kept saying yes. That's the part that kept surprising me. Like in moments was like, okay, do you want to think about a program together? I hear this, and this. They kept saying yeah, and so that also provoked another way to think about it, which was that there was potential in places I didn't even expect it that we could explore together or build on. Yeah.
Thank you for that question. I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you, Jill, and thank all of you. I think it's really refreshing as an arts worker to just be hearing folks in directorial positions with curatorial backgrounds, like so many of us who are emerging institution, art, cultural work, and artists speak to their experiences. I guess my question is, as a person who also approaches this sort of living and existing in this museum, art institutional orbit as service, public service, caretaking work, do you have any reflections for emerging curator who is inheriting sort of some of these institutional mishaps, trouble pasts? I'm mincing words here to not reveal the place that I work for, but you all are familiar with it for sure. And just thinking about, and specifically, a lot of you all are, I think 3 out of 4 of you are working for institutions that are associated with a place of higher education as well. So thinking about that, and so am I. So thinking about that, are there any just like reflections that you have to the collective?
Don't quit.
Got you. That's a great start.
I was trying, yes. I was like, if you find someone that you connect with, like ask for mentorship, build that was one way for me. Like, and it was just one way to keep going, to find courage. And to your point, like I am on a school campus, and I repeat that to students all the time. The door is always open. If you want to talk, let's find a moment, let's find an opportunity.
Do you all feel, thank you so much, do you all feel like because the institution that I work with, I think a lot of my work in sort of founding and promoting some institutional best practices is also having a clear relationship and pathway for students of the university to work within the organization and really be accomplice to the sort of work that we're setting out to do, and using that sort of energy of students. Do you feel like, have you all encountered some disparity in trying to merge those two worlds that you're living in, from the museum side to the school and institutional space?
Well, I don't teach at Kenyon, but I will say, like, at the museum, we have this incredible students internship, paid internship program. And one of the things that I love, it's a program that I inherited, so I can't take all the credit, but I would say one of the things that I loved about it is it's open to any students on campus. It means you don't have to come from art history, you don't need, and I think that as a basis challenged the way they build community, but also how they relate to museum work, which is much more embedded in collaborative practices. And actually it makes it so much stronger, because I will say, the science students are incredible interpreters. They observe in a way, and that's the core of what they do in a lab. And when you challenge that and put that in perspective within museum work, I think they help each other in such an impactful way. So I don't know that I can answer so specifically, but just more saying how the retaining strategy, how the calls are being made, the fact that they're paid, the fact that anyone can apply. So you have this opportunity even within the students group during these 4 years where they impact and mentor one another, coming from different perspectives towards the work. And I love that there is this openness that allows for something more self-discovery based, but
Right.
also building a network. And that, I feel, is a skill that can be transferred as you go on in life, rather if you work in a museum or not. But that can be built in that environment that is so, can be so exploratory and interpretation based.
Yeah.
Thank you. Klaudio, Veronica, Courtney, Daisy, you are inspiring, and we really appreciate your sharing your initiatives with us today. So please join me in thanking them.
Thank you all. Thank you.